introduction to predictive project management, and we're going to focus on just a traditional type of project management, waterfall project management. Those words are all going to be synonymous for this presentation today. First of all, let's talk just basically about project management in general and the different methods of project management. Now, today's focus is going to be on predictive. We will be talking about predictive project management, and then we also have what's called iterative and incremental approaches. And iterative or incremental are typically associated with Agile. However, in today's environment, we really use iterative and incremental also in a traditional environment as well. Those are really the primary methods of project management. Now, when we look at Agile, there are many different Agile methods out there that can be used, and each one of them has somewhat different method associated with them, such as Scrum or Lean or Kanban or Safety and so forth. If we were to compare, just high-level comparison of a waterfall versus Agile, we would see that waterfall gets its name basically from flowing through or flowing down. So as we complete each one of these items listed here, then that flows down into the next. So waterfall is typically referred to as a fall through or waterfall, where you complete one part of the project planning, you move to the next part of the project, the next part of the project, and so forth. So you complete them in a serial fashion. On the other hand, when we look at Agile, we have, first of all, the requirements. Then as we understand the requirements, we will do the design, we'll develop, we'll test, we'll deploy, and we'll review. And we just keep repeating this cycle until we have met the definition of done. Completely different approach with Agile versus a true waterfall approach. Most of the time, we're not talking a true waterfall approach. We're talking about a lot of progressive types of Agile included in it. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is a term that's called progressive elaboration. With progressive elaboration, we elaborate on those things that are near to us that we can plan in detail. And as we move into more depth in the project and we learn more about the project, then we will add more to the plan itself. And that is actually a type of Agile. So what we're going to focus on today is what we call the 10 by 5 by 49. Now this 10 by 5 by 49 is based on the 6th edition of the PMBOK guide. And this is process-based project management. It would be just the opposite of Agile in a number of ways. In Agile, we have very few processes. In 6th edition or in a traditional project management approach, we typically have these 49 different processes that we use based on the needs of the project itself. So in this, you can see that we have 10 different knowledge areas going down the left side. We have the 5 process groups going across the top. And then internal to this, we have 49 different processes that we use to help us initiate the project, plan the project, execute the project, monitor the project, and then ultimately close the project itself. Now, from a general standpoint, we usually manage from the integration management level. That's where we start the project, we plan the project, we execute the project, we monitor it, and then we close the project. So integration management knowledge area is the macro level, and that is the level at which we as a project manager generally manage the project itself. All right, so all of the other areas, all of the other processes roll up into this integration management knowledge area group. and you manage from that. It looks at the whole project. We're looking at the whole project. We're looking down over the other processes, the knowledge areas, everything, and we're managing at that level. So that's why integration, the word integration, we integrate the project itself. Now, we are a process-based project approach. The processes, for example, each process delivers something useful for the project. So, for example, the process called identify stakeholders. The purpose of that process is to identify stakeholders that we have for the project, and that will be providing us with the requirements and the other foundational information that we need to be able to develop our plan, execute the project, and so forth. As far as the process structure, we have inputs into them, which would provide us with anything that's required to do the process. Okay, we then have the tools and techniques. Those are the tools and techniques that we will use to analyze the inputs, for example. And then based on that analysis and the development within that process itself, we have the outputs, which are the result of that process. Every process falls into this same category, this same structure. So now as we look at the role of a project manager in a traditional project, we realize that the project manager is in charge of the project, and they should be held accountable for the project and the results of it. They are the decision maker. They're authorized to spend the money. They solve problems. They make decisions. They're always proactive. They always investigate before they take action. They have a very strong leadership set of skills and soft skills that enable them to lead in these projects themselves. You see, a project manager is going to be balancing a lot of balls in the air at the same time. Cost, schedule, scope, resource, quality, risk, stakeholders, changes, everything in the project, they're going to have to balance that. And we have what we call this iron triangle or triple constraint. Every predictive project has the cost, time, and scope, and we translate those actually into baselines. But this iron triangle, this triple constraint, dictates that number one, if you have a change in scope or in one leg of the triangle, then it's going to certainly impact at least one of the other legs, if not both of the other legs. So a scope change, in other words, would drive a cost change perhaps, and also perhaps a time change, schedule change. You as a project manager, you're balancing all these balls so that you can maintain and achieve the requirements of the cost, the time, and the scope that is required for this particular project you're working on. Now, we always have 3 baselines. Actually, there's 4, but 3 of them make up the 4th. We always have a scope baseline. What is the scope of this project? The details of it. We always have a schedule baseline. What is the schedule for completion of this project, for executing the activities? And then we have a cost baseline. What are the costs associated with each activity, and when are we going to expect to pay out for those costs? Now, the 3 of these, scope, schedule, and cost, combine together at the integration management knowledge area where we have the performance measurement baseline. And that is a combination of all 3. That is how the project itself is functioning, how the project itself is performing. And that's very important. And those are the tools, those are the primary tools that we use to gauge our project and really to complete the project itself. The 10x5x49 that I showed you earlier. Now, how do you manage that? How do you do that? I have a presentation, actually it's online and you'll have access to that if you want to view it, on how all that 10x5x49 relates to each other. However, to really manage projects, we have to have a practical approach to it. Now, I have a course that talks about practical project management. I'm going to use this template here to show you what we're going to talk about today. First of all, we're going to initiate the project. Then we're going to plan the project. Then we will execute the project. Then we'll monitor and control the project to make sure we're executing the project in accordance with the plan. And then we'll close the project. In a traditional waterfall type of approach, we say we initiate it, then we plan it, then we execute it, then we monitor and control it, and then we close it. When we close it, we deliver the deliverable or transfer that deliverable to the customer. So it's a one-time thing. Now, that may be many deliverables, but it's a one-time thing, and it's usually at the end of the project where we transfer that deliverable to the customer. Agile, we deliver frequently value to the customer. Frequently, we deliver value to the customer. And we don't do it at the end of the project, but we do it at the end of each iteration. So there's a big difference there between Agile as well as Waterfall. Now, to initiate that project, first thing we have to have is a project charter. By the way, Agile needs a project charter too. That says, I have a project. But it's a little bit different for traditional in that it specifically names the project manager by name, establishes their level of authority. It gives us a high-level description of the project. It gives us a high-level description of the deliverable. And it has other information in it also. Now, this project charter is used to get this project kicked off. And you can see here, the project charter is an input into these different processes in that 10 by 5 by 49. It kicks off the project. This is my foundation to start building on my knowledge about this project. So that is critical to us in our projects, to have that project charter, that high-level information, and be able to start then planning the project so we can move forward with the execution. Now here's what a project charter might look like. This project charter, we're again describing the purpose and key objectives of the project, high-level project requirements, what are the project boundaries, limitations on that, right? We don't want a project that's going to build a whole community if we're only building one building, right? Describe the key deliverables, high-level requirements, perhaps some project risk. We may have some budget and time restraints or constraints in it, and that would be specified in the project charter. And then the authority level of the project manager, some of the key stakeholders perhaps, and what conditions would cause us to exit this project. And then certainly the name of the project manager is specified in this project charter. It's a key document that we need for our project. So now we have our project charter. We need to get started, first of all, on identifying stakeholders. These are the people that are going to give us the requirements for this project. This is going to give us the foundational information that we need. We analyze those stakeholders. Okay, we analyze them. We want to understand them. We want to understand their impact on the project. We want to understand their expectations of the project. We want to understand all of these things and how we're going to keep them engaged in the project itself. Identify stakeholders then is going to give us what we call the stakeholder registers. This is what a stakeholder register might look like. And you can see it's very high level. Name, position, role, contact information, communication requirements, project expectations, and project status classifications. Again, we want to understand, and we'll dig deeper into these stakeholders as we progress through the project so that we can make sure that we keep them engaged in the project. Did you know keeping stakeholders engaged in a project, you'll have a successful project? If you don't keep them engaged in the project, the likelihood of your having a successful project is not It's not very likely. So we have our stakeholders' requirements. We need to have a project management plan. When we talk about a project management plan, we're talking about, in traditional project management, we're talking about up to 19 subsidiary components to that project management plan. We have one project management plan, but that one project management plan is going to be made up of perhaps 18, 19 different subsidiary components. So we look at that in a little bit deeper depth. It's formal, it's written, it's signed by key people that are associated with the project. It is progressively elaborated. That term, progressive elaboration. As I learn more about my project, I update to reflect that information that I learned about the project. The planning on projects. Now listen to this. That next to last bullet item there is very important. We normally don't complete planning on a project until we close the project out. We're always going to be learning. We're always going to be doing progressive elaboration up until the time we close the project and we transition it to the customer. Here are the list of subsidiary plans. And those plans, if you look at this, these are all processes in that 10 by 5 by 49 that I showed you. These are under the planning process group. And each one of these processes gives us an output that is a part of the project management plan. For example, plan schedule management is the name of the process. Plan schedule management gives us the schedule management plan. Plan cost management, for example, gives us the cost management plan. Create WBS right here gives us the scope baseline. Develop schedule process gives us the schedule baseline, and so forth. One plan made up of 19 subcomponents. We do a lot of planning in waterfall traditional projects. Here is an example of kind of a generic type of a plan. Now, this really does not have any details about what the scope is, the deliverable is, and so forth, but it guides us. This is a plan that guides us into the execution of the project, into the collecting of the requirements and the determination of what the work breakdown structure is going to consist of, and all these types of things. So it's a guiding type of a plan. And you can see that you have your thresholds over here and things of that nature that are important to understand and to know for your project. The project management plan can take on many forms. You can have individual plans, for example, for scope, schedule, costs. You can have one combined plan as this is representing here. But now the importance of this plan, very important. We start off by the processes. These are the processes or the outputs of the other processes. These are the outputs of the other planning processes. Now look at this. We combine them together, and they are an input into integrations process called Develop Project Management Plan, where I combine all of these plans together into my one project management plan. So it's very important to have these plans as we go through our projects. And of course, again, we are in the planning part of the project in that chart that I showed you earlier on. So we're still in the planning part of it. Think about it this way. I have a project charter. I know who the stakeholders are. I've identified stakeholders. So now I can start building the scope of the project. Building the scope of the project. What is the detailed information that I need to be able to execute this project? When I collect requirements, those are the foundational requirements coming from the stakeholders that will be used to develop the scope for this project. The primary output is the requirements documentation. We go to our stakeholders and we draw from them their requirements for this project. We justify those requirements for this project. We make sure that they solve some sort of a problem that needs to be solved as a result of this project. So we take those requirements documentation and then we're going to build on those. Now, my project team is going to be very vital to me. And as I'm collecting the requirements from the stakeholders, and then as we are developing those requirements further into our scope that is required for this project. So requirements documentation is again basic information such as the requirement, the stakeholder, the category, the priority, the acceptance criteria, how we're going to test or verify it, and in the phase or when it will be released. Those are important items that we need to understand for our project. Now we take this one level further, and that is through the requirements traceability matrix. If I have a question on a requirement, who do I go to clarify that question? I need help on a requirement. Who do I go to? And that's what this traceability matrix would do. We trace those requirements back to their origin so that we can get more information or do whatever it might be that we need to do with regards to those requirements. So requirements documentation. Now we need to go to another level. That is called define scope process, and that gives us the scope statement. What we do is with our team, we sit down and we take all of those requirements that we've collected and we rewrite those requirements into the scope statement. The scope statement is a comprehensive text document, and that's what our scope is going to look like when we finish this project. That's what our deliverable will contain with regards to scope. So it's a comprehensive text document that describes in detail what this project is going to be like and the deliverable. Now, I said project, didn't I? You see, we have a project, but we also have a deliverable. The project includes everything that's going to be done on this project, including the deliverable, whereas the deliverable is specific to what we're going to be delivering for this project. So we have to understand the project as well as the product deliverable requirements. So we rewrite those requirements into the scope statement. The scope statement is the primary output. It is done by the project manager and the team members. This is a great team building opportunity here. You know, even if I'm the subject matter expert, I need the input from other people because I don't know everything. And my team members, I want them to take ownership of this project. I don't want them to think of it as this is Roy's project. I want them to take ownership and say, this is my project. And this is one of the ways that we can do that. This is our understanding of what this project and the deliverables are all about. Okay, very important that our team is involved with us there. Now this scope statement, we look at the scope statement, for example, and we have here the detailed description. We have here the project deliverable detailed description. We have here the product acceptance criteria. I want to say this very clearly. Acceptance criteria, we want to start off at the charter level. High-level acceptance criteria. At the requirements level, I want to know the acceptance criteria for each requirement. What says I have met that requirement? Now I'm working more at the project level, and I'm talking about the scope statement. What says this project scope has been completed? It has been met. What's the acceptance criteria? What are the project exclusions? That's very important to understand exclusions, particularly if there's a situation where you may think or assume or it's likely that something is included in the project. If it's not included, you want to make sure that you exclude it. And then you have your project constraints, such as a time or a cost constraint. And project assumptions, things that we believe to be true, in other words. And then also an opportunity here to record risk that might be affiliated with the scope of the project. So now we take this project scope statement and we create what's known as the scope baseline. Here we're talking about the WBS, the work breakdown structure. We do decompose that scope statement along the team and the project manager. We decompose that scope statement into the WBS. All the WBS is a graphical chart such as this that has a title, it has an index number primarily on it, and that's the work that will be done on the project to complete the project. We have that work package. So for example, this would be a branch here, and this would be work packages underneath those branches. Now the work package is the smallest unit of the WBS. For example, if I had a WBS work package that says pour foundation, then I would execute that work package, and all the work packages have to be executed to complete the branch and then also to complete the project itself. So the WBS is going to contain all of the work that is to be done on the project itself. So the work breakdown structure. So we are in the process here that's called create WBS. But look at what my primary output here is. My primary output is the scope baseline. Remember I said we had 3 baselines, scope, schedule, and cost? Those baselines are placed under control once they have been produced. What do I mean? I'm going to check those baselines, the actual results coming from executing to the plan, to make sure that we are executing in accordance with the plan. And I'm going to do that for all 3 of those baselines. Now the scope is foundational to everything else in the project. If we get the scope wrong, the project is going to be wrong. It's unique to each project. But look at this next bullet item. The scope baseline is made up of 3 things. The scope statement we talked about, the WBS we showed you, and the WBS dictionary, which contains the details for each work package. Everything else is going to be built based on the scope, the schedule, the cost, resources that we need, the quality. Now, the baselines, all 3 of them, scope, schedule, and cost, are the original plus all approved change requests. So if I have a change to the scope and I issue a change request and it's approved, then I can change that scope baseline. If it's not approved or if there's no change request, then it's not approved, it's gold plating. It's providing more or different than what the customer is required. We have our scope baseline. We can now decompose that scope baseline down into the activities and develop the schedule itself. So develop schedule process gives us basically our project schedule and our schedule baseline. What's the difference? The schedule baseline is placed under control. We monitor it to the plan to make sure the actual results to the plan, which is a schedule baseline, to make sure that we're staying on schedule. In traditional project management, we typically have 3 approaches of schedule. 3 approaches of schedule. We have the milestone chart. Milestones that we have to meet. We need to understand what they are. We create what we call a network diagram, and that's going to show the dependencies of the activities, when they will be completed, their relationship to each other. The project team is going to be very interested in this. Then we have the Gantt chart, which shows the task and it shows the sequence and percentage complete and other things such as that. when people are going to be used, and of course your functional managers are going to be interested in that Gantt chart. Senior management, though, they want to see that milestone chart, don't they? They don't want the details. So our next process then is to estimate activity resources. Estimate activity resources has an impact on the schedule. Significant impact. What if I use 2 paint crews instead of 1? What does that do to my duration estimates for that completing the activity of paint the house? I also have physical resources such as bricks and mortar and 2x4s and whatever. I also have the human resources, the database programmers, whatever it might be. So I have to go through, once I have that activity list, and I have to determine what resources do I need to complete each activity, both physical and human resources. What types of resources and what quantities are needed. And as I said, we may actually do some what-if analysis as we are estimating activity resources so that maybe we can optimize our cost later, comes next, and perhaps so we can optimize our duration estimates, the schedule for the project itself. So we estimate activity resources, and that gives us the resource requirements. So here we would have an example of the project resource requirements. The resource, the quantity, any assumptions, and the name or the physical status of those resources. Estimate cost process. So we take that activity list now and we're going to estimate the cost for each and every activity. We're going to establish the cost for each activity. Of course, cost is going to be based on the physical resources that are required, human resources that are required, durations, several different things that will come into play to estimate the cost for the project. What I have to do here is I have to understand the cost so I can know when I'll be paying for those costs. I will tie my cost baseline, actually, which is coming up, to my schedule so I know exactly when I will be paying for my activities in the project. So estimate cost process. We have several different tools that we might use to estimate cost, and we're going to come up with a cost for each activity, labor costs, physical costs, reserves, how we estimated it, basis of estimate, the range and the confidence level that we have. So any number of things would be included in our activity cost estimates. Determine budget process. So think about it this way. I have my charter. I have my project management plan. I have my scope. I have my schedule. I have my cost estimates. I'm going to tie all of those things together to create my cost baseline, making sure that I meet any budgetary constraints that I might have. So determine budget process gives us the cost baseline. Now this cost baseline is time-phased to the schedule, so I know when I'll be paying out for the costs themselves for each activity. That's important to understand. You know, I may end up doing some what we call funding limit reconciliation. What funding limit reconciliation says is, I'm going to send off my budget to the CFO, let them review it to make sure we can fund this project as it is planned. Now, maybe that CFO says, no, we got the big payout here at a low revenue, high expense time. Let's push the project out. So we may have to push the project out to satisfy the organization's ability to pay for the project. And that's a common thing that we might do. So determine budget process gives us the cost baseline. So now we have our scope, schedule, and cost baselines, which are foundational to the details of the project and what we're going to be delivering, what our expected schedule is, and what our costs are expected to be. Just a couple of comments here. We have to have the schedule baseline and scope baseline before we can even start this process. It is based on the activity cost estimates, and it is time phased. The budget is time phased to the schedule. And if we need to do the funding limit reconciliation, then of course we would do that as well. So the cost baseline here, it can look many different ways, whatever your methodology calls for. But here we have a time phase payout of our cost baseline. Now what we're going to do after we get to this point is we're going to move then into the execution of the project. Execute the project is done under direct and managed project work. That's where we take the plan and that's where we execute the plan. Our primary output of this process is the deliverable itself. The deliverable itself is the output of direct and managed project work. We execute the project plan. If we have an approved change request, this is where we would incorporate those changes. This is where we will handle all defect repairs. Any work done on the project is going to be done under direct and managed project work. This is where we spend the money. This is where we execute the work packages. So direct and managed project work, we're executing the project. All right, so now think of this. I have a plan. I'm executing that plan. I now want to monitor my execution to make sure I'm executing in accordance with the plan. That's where monitor and control project work comes into play. Is my project progressing according to the plan? If I have a variance, I need to take action to correct that variance, to bring that variance back in alignment with the plan. I might change the plan, I might change the work that's being done, or both, combination of both, but I want to bring those two things in alignment. And I generate, as a result of that, the work performance report. Change request. If I have a change request that's issued to bring the variance under control, it goes into the process called Perform Integrated Change Control. That is an integration process. Remember, integration macro level, I'm looking down on the project. So when I'm looking at that change request, I'm looking for its impact on the entire project. If it's a scope change, I'm not looking just at scope. I'm looking at resources, I'm looking at schedule, I'm looking at cost, I'm looking at quality, I'm looking at communication, I'm looking at everything. So I'm going to evaluate that change request impact on the project itself under this process called Perform Integrated Change Control. My output is going to be then the approved change request. If it's a scope, cost, or schedule baseline change, I will then update them to reflect this new information. All change requests flow into this process. We make a decision on those changes. Now here is an example of a change request. Remember our cost baseline we had earlier? We have a cost change here. So you can see this is our cost baseline here. If it's an approved change request, look at our revised budget, our revised cost baseline. Okay, our revised cost baseline is modified then to reflect those changes. So now we started off with a $750,000 budget or cost baseline. Now, due to the changes that have been incorporated, our new baseline is now $840,000. This is what we will now measure our cost to with regards to this project. Changes can come from basically anywhere in the project. If you were to go down this and look at it, you would see there are planning processes, there are executing processes, there are initiating processes, monitoring, controlling processes. Change requests can come from anywhere, but they always flow as an input into perform integrated change control. We evaluate that change request for its impact on the project, and we approve change request as an output. Control quality. Obviously, I'm skipping over 40 processes probably. I'm combining them in a manner of high level. But control quality is one of the 10 monitoring controlling processes below integration. It's important because I am looking at the deliverable. The deliverable is an output of direct and managed project work. It flows into control quality. In control quality, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a point-by-point inspection of that deliverable to make sure it meets the quality requirements, the specification requirements. If it meets that specification requirements, then it's going to flow out of control quality as a verified deliverable. That term indicates it met the quality requirements. Now that verified deliverable is then going to flow into validate scope. That's also one of the 10 monitoring and controlling processes. Except I'm looking at the scope. Is the scope complete? Are all the features present in the scope that are supposed to be there? So we look at scope and we validate scope, do a point-by-point inspection to make sure all of it is present, all the scope is present. Then my output from validate scope would be the accepted deliverable. The customer is going to be there with us doing this validate scope, and they're going to accept that deliverable. It is good. We're ready to go with it. So validate scope. Then that accepted deliverable, which is an output of validate scope, flows as an input into closed project or process. And this is where we transition that deliverable then to the customer. The customer now is going to take full ownership of it. We'll do any transition things that we need to do to make sure the customer now has full control of that deliverable. So as we look back over what I've been talking about, you can see how we progress from the initiation to the planning, to the executing, to the monitoring, controlling, to the acceptance of the deliverable, and then certainly to the level where the project is closed out. That's waterfall. Typically, we produce one item at a time, one item meaning the stages that we went through, and then we deliver the deliverable at the end of the project. In a true sense of the word, a lot of times we incorporate that progressive elaboration into it. We incorporate Agile into that. And it's not really a true waterfall approach or predictive approach. Many, many times. As a matter of fact, I can quite honestly tell you, I have never worked a true waterfall project. I've always had implementation of progressive elaboration and some Agile as a part of my projects. I just didn't know what the word Agile meant. I didn't know it existed. But it's always been that way for me as a project manager.